A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. I may have to ask anybody other than Ulil to mute their sound because the recording picks up, for some reason, whoever it is that they think is the most prominent. I don't know. Today we have Ulil Abshar Abdalla. Mas Ulil is born in Pati, Central Java, to a traditional Islamic family with a strong rooting in the Nahdlatul Ulama culture. His father was running a small pesantren, a traditional madrasa, where Ulil attended when he was a small child, and then he proceeded for middle and high school to Ulil Falah, another madrasa. He did his undergraduate studies in the Department of Islamic Law and Sharia in LIPIA, which is the Institute of Study of Arabic and Islamic Sciences, a Saudi college, giving him a good training in modern Arabic. His experiences in this university enabled him to understand the Wahhabi and Ikhwani ideology very well. 12 years later, he did his postgraduate studies at the Department of Religion at Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts. He has been involved in social and intellectual activism for most of his life. He was the head of the National Board of Ilaq Peace Dam, Nahdlatul Ulama, the Institute of Research and Human Development affiliated with the Nahdlatul Ulama. And he's also been the executive director of ICRP for Interfaith Dialogue and Peace Education. In 2001, he founded a controversial organization called Liberal Islam Network, or Jaringan Islam Libero. The founding of the organization was meant as a response to the rising trend of Islamic fundamentalism and radicalism in Indonesia, about which I hope he speaks. He contributed op-eds to national magazines and newspapers, and is the author of several important publications, including Burning Down the House of God, Religion in Private and Public Schools. I like that title. And a book on liberal Islamic ijtihad in 2005. His most recent book, I have a copy of. It's in Bahasa, so you can see. And he is one of the most well-known and popular speakers in the context of the modern Muslim movements in Indonesia, and has a substantial contribution to the public discourse, raising people's awareness of multiple ways to integrate Islam, spirituality, and political activism. And it is that which really caused me to want him to be one of my friends along the way. So, Mas Ulil, you have the floor.
I'm sorry, I'm not unmuting. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good night or good morning, everyone. It's a great honor for me to be invited into this conversation by Amina Wadud. And I've been following this conversation live and on YouTube for quite some time, and I really enjoyed this conversation. And it's really a great honor to be here finally as a guest of my favorite thinker, because honestly speaking, one of the thinkers that shaped my thought, my intellectual journey is Professor Amina Wadud, in addition to other scholars and thinkers. So it's really honored to be here, and I do not have any expectation in my life to be included in the list of friend of Amina Wadud. And one other thing I want to mention here, that this is give me an honor and a pride. I was honored to be an imam for a lady imam during Ramadan this year. Because, I mean, given the situation, so we cannot perform collective prayer for Taraweeh for this year. So we did a Taraweeh online on Zoom. Some friends joined the Jama'ah, the Taraweeh prayer together, including Ibu Amina. So I was the leader of Ibu Amina at some time, and she was the leader also of the Jama'ah. So this is because when I learned for the first time, a long time ago, when I still run the Liberal Islam Network, when I learned about Amina Wadud initiating the Jama'ah, the prayer with Amina as a leader. That was like an eye-opening moment for me. And I was like excited to finally see a woman being an imam. That's, I mean, even though that's a simple, a simple thing, but for me, it's like a game changer moment in my life. So it's so honored for me to be here with Amina as leading her and my leader as well at the same time. So thank you, for Amina, for inviting me. I'm really honored. So I want to be just straightforward to the business. I want to talk about a little bit about my personal journey into activism, into Islamic reform movement in Indonesia, and finally into Sufism. That's my trajectory. So, okay, I will share just a picture, if I may. Is it possible, Ibu Amina, for me to share a screen? Is it possible? No? Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Yes, I hope you can do it. I have to make you the co-host as far as the permission to share.
Yes.
So give me a second to do that. And make co-host. And then that gives you technical access. Yes, should work.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, so just to make my flow of presentation a bit easier for me, so I want to share a short, a slide. Yeah. Okay. So let me start by talking about two organizations that play a very important role in Indonesian Islam. One is Nahdlatul Ulama. This is a traditionalist Islam. Nahdlatul Ulama is an Islamic organization that was established in 1926, and one of its mission is to defend the traditional Islamic teaching as encapsulated in the tradition of madhab, the Shafi'i madhab particularly. Muhammadiyah is a modernist movement that was inspired by the ideas of Muhammad Abdu. So I belong to the Nahdlatul Ulama tradition. I grew up in this family. So I grew up in a traditional family with a very strong, scientific tradition, traditional Islamic sciences. So I grew up in a madrasa environment. I studied almost all branches of the traditional Islamic sciences, particularly the fiqh or the legal studies, especially the Shafi'i madhab, starting from a very short treatise going up to the advanced and more comprehensive literature like, you know, al-muhadhab and so forth. Yeah. So that's my background. And then when I was in a college, this is very interesting. I went to a Wahhabi university in Jakarta, and the reason I went to this university was for a very simple reason, because my family was poor. They cannot afford sending me to the public university. So I went to this university because this university gives all students going there scholarships, including the allowance, so I can study there for my undergraduate studies. So, I mean, my parent was actually opposed to my plan going to this university initially, but because of the economic situation, they allow me to go there. And I learned a lot of things in this university, particularly because in madrasa, when I was in madrasa, I learned classical Arabic, like, you know, Arabic that is used in the so-called Kitab Kuning, the yellow books. That was the name for the classical literature in Indonesia, the yellow books, because the color of the paper was yellow. So that's why it's called yellow book. Yeah. So I studied classical Arabic in pesantren, in madrasa, in the traditional madrasa. When I went to the college, I studied, and this is a very, you know, a very important opportunity for me to study another Arabic, because I study the modern Arabic. And that's allowed me to have a larger access to modern literature. For the first time in my life, I was exposed to the literature written by the Ikhwani intellectual and writers like Sayyid Qutb and others. I still remember when I was, for the first time, I read the manifesto, the Islamist manifesto, the so-called Islamist manifesto by Sayyid Qutb, the Ma'alim fi Tariq, or signpost on the road. That's very controversial book. Yeah, I was like, you know, shocked. I was shocked because, I mean, this book was so beautifully written in modern Arabic that I fell in love with it in instant, because of the beauty of the language. And for some time, I fell in love with Sayyid Qutb. And I enjoy reading this book because for the first time, I learned about Islamic ideology, and I learned about, you know, Islam as political ideology. Because never in my life, when I was still in madrasa, never in my life did I learn about Islam as a political ideology. I studied Islam as an intellectual tradition, as a theology, as a legal studies, but I never studied Islam as a political ideology. So when for the first time I was exposed to Islam as political ideology, that was like you know, an eye-opening moment in my life. So when I read the Ma'alim fi Tariq, or the signpost on the road by Sayyid Qutb, I was shocked, because Islam appears to me not only as a tradition that I lived during my life growing up in traditional family. I learned Islam as a system, as a comprehensive system. And as a young man, I was like, wow, this is what I need. as you know, as a human being. I need Islam as a comprehensive system. But then later on, I was disappointed with Said Qutb because of, you know, to cut the story short, I was disappointed by the fact that this, I mean, his thought, his ideas, his formulation of Islam is so reductionist, and
I think we lost Mas Ulil. Maybe he'll come back. Hopefully he'll come back.
Yeah, disconnection.
Welcome to Indonesia.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
He's come back.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
No worries.
Yep,
yeah,
yep.
you froze for a minute and then, yes, can you hear me?
Okay, I'm
We hear
sorry,
you,
the
man.
connection was disrupted. Okay, let's me continue. So, yes, I can hear you. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, my years, I mean, 5 years in Wahhabi University taught me a lot of things. I studied the Wahhabi theology, and this is also for me is a very exciting moment as well, because I studied traditional theology, Ash'ari, and particularly Ash'ari theology, with its very sophisticated philosophical, structure. When I studied Wahhabi theology, it was so simple and easy to understand, and give me, like, you know, a sense of purpose. When for the first time I studied Wahhabi theology, it's like this is different type of understanding of Islam, because, you know, I mean, it's simple, it's black and white, and it's give me, like, you know, a sense that this is a more solid way to be a Muslim, because you know, the structure of Wahhabi theology is such that it is founded mostly on the Hadith and Quranic verses, giving me a sense that this is more Islamic than Ash'ari theology, which is founded more on rational basis. But then, I mean, when I studied more and more about this theology, I get disappointed as well, because its simplicity. I mean, because I'm a big fan of ideas and intellectual, I have an intellectual curiosity. So this theology, I mean, despite its simplicity and its apparently being more grounded on the Quran and Hadith and prophetic tradition, I mean, for me, it's shallow. It's shallow. So I quit. I mean, I abandoned, or, you know, I abandoned the study of this theology, and then I started to study philosophy on my own. And then next step in my journey is intellectual activism. This started, I mean, few years after I graduated. I started this movement in 2001. Liberal Islam Network. I mean, the name Liberal Islam was quite controversial, and it gave me notoriety that I never expected. Yeah, I regretted actually adopting this name, because in my initial, in my mind, when I say liberal Islam, what what I thought was that this is about adopting more, more rational approach to Islam, more rational understanding of Islam. I mean, liberal here, I mean, has less to do with liberalism as it is understood in the Western tradition. So what I understand by liberal Islam or liberalism here is simply to go back to the rational tradition in Islam, which is the Mu'tazila tradition. I have a short or brief infatuation with the Mu'tazila theology when I was in college. After I abandoned the study of Wahhabi theology, I started to study philosophy and then Mu'tazila theology. And I saw in Mu'tazila a promise of freeing myself from the traditional understanding of Islam, which is for me is exciting because I need a more individual and more rational understanding of Islam. So that started my new journey in my personal trajectory as a Muslim scholar. But the initiation of the founding of this movement was actually correlated with the situation that we were facing after the Indonesian entrance into democracy in 1998. Yeah. Indonesian democracy was quite ambiguous. In one hand, it gives us more freedom and liberty in exercising our political right, our social right, and our cultural right. But that's one side of democracy. The other side is the increasing and the emerging Islamic conservatism. The jihadi movement started after Indonesia entered democracy. So liberal Islam was actually a response to the increasing conservatism that was one of the most important characteristics of the Indonesian cultural landscape after a democratization process. Yeah. So this, for me, liberal Islam is maybe one of the most important stage or experience in my life, because this is my experimentation with understanding Islam, combining traditional Islamic sciences that I studied in madrasah with my rational and philosophical tradition and studies that I started later on. So this is like my great venture into Islamic thought, trying to experiment with Islamic hermeneutic. And at this stage, I encountered Amina Wadud through her books, Woman and the Quran, yeah, Quran and the Woman. That was, for me, was an eye-opening moment, because Amina's work was facilitating me to understand Islam in a way that I believe this is one of the best way to understand Islam, responding to the modern situation. Because even though I grew up in a traditional family, and I'm really proud of learning Islam and studying Islam and traditional Islamic sciences, I have also many disappointment with traditional Islam as well. I still remember the liberal moment, let's say, quote unquote, in my life occurred when I was like 17 years old in madrasah, when I studied a small treatise of Shafi'i madhab. Yeah, it's called At-Taqrib. Yeah, this is the first book that you have to study when you want to study the Shafi'i madhab, At-Taqrib. Yeah, written by Abu Shuja. I mean, in that treatise, I learned something for me was like, strange. Yeah. There was a statement in that book saying that anything that, that was statement related to the issue of the chapter on the food and beverage, Kitabul At'imah wal Ashriba, on the halal food and halal beverage. Yeah. So there was a statement or maxim, a qaida, a legal maxim, legal qaida, saying that any food that Arab consider good is halal. And any food that Arab distaste is haram. That was, for me, was like, it cannot be right. I mean, why Arab should be a standard? So, mastahsanathu al-Arab fahuwa halalun wa mastaqbahathu al-Arab fahuwa haramun. So, any food that Arab considered as good, as delicious, is halal. Any food that Arab, distasted, I mean, doesn't like it, it's haram. So that's the legal maxim. When I learned that, no, I was like 13 years old. I mean, even younger, 13 years old, because that was the first treatise on fiqh that I should study. Yeah. So I was shocked. But I cannot ask my father, my teacher. Yeah, I didn't dare asking my father why should be like this. But that thing lingered in my mind for many long time. So there is something problematic in our legal literature that need a rethinking. So when I read Wadud works on Quran and women, that was a liberating moment for me. This is it. This is something I need to rethink my tradition. I love my tradition. I like it because that was a formation that I grew up in, but I find it problematic as well. That's the liberal moment, the first liberal moment in my life. And it stick in my mind until now. So I grapple with it. I mean, throughout my life, how should I deal with my tradition? It's part of me, but it has some problem in it. Also, I mean, even though when I was still in madrasa, I mean, that long before I was exposed to the modernist or Mu'tazila or rational tradition, I was like, I had a lot of question in my mind regarding, for example, regarding how our legal tradition deal with the woman as well. When I learned for the first time in the Quran about God allowing husband to strike his wife, that was for me also liberal moment as well. This cannot be right, but I cannot deal with. I have no intellectual tool how to deal with it. I still remember when I went to Kuala Lumpur for an international conference organized by Abdullah Badawi. I visited Sister in Islam office and I attended a small discussion organized there, and Amina was in attendance giving a lecture. Amina was sitting in the chair with her unique hair. So and something I still remember until now is this, Amina. You said among other things that the idea of Allahu Akbar. I mean, normally we translate Allahu Akbar as Allah is great, but Amina brought us like a different idea. Allahu Akbar, I mean, grammatically speaking, Allahu Akbar is not Allah is great, but Allah is greater. Allah is greater than anything we think about him or her or it. That was for me was, wow, this is interesting. So Allah is greater than anything we human beings think about him or her. Even Allah is greater than the Quran itself. And I wrote a piece about this, and it was published in Tempo, the largest magazine. When I came back from Kuala Lumpur, I wrote an article, Amina, about that in Tempo magazine. because this is, for me, it's very interesting that God, I mean, God as presented in his scripture or in her scripture is larger, is much greater than our imagination as a human being. And this remind me of Ibn Arabi's idea. Now I move to my next trajectory in Sufism, my venture into Sufism. Why I started Sufism? So, I mean, there is Ibn Arabi in his Al-Futuhat Al-Makkiyah. He came up with a very interesting idea as a great Sufi. Ibn Arabi differentiate between two kind of God. So there are two type of God. One is God in his or herself. This is God that nobody have any understanding of him or her. This is a mysterious God, ineffable God, God that inaccessible to our knowledge. Al-ilah fi nafsihi li dhatihi. I mean, God in him is in himself or in herself. This is the first God. But this God, given its inaccessibility to the human cognition, it's mysterious. But we need God that we can understand. And there come the second type of God. This is a God as human perceive it. Ibn Arabi used the term al-ilahul mu'taqad. Al-ilahul mu'taqad. And this is the second God. So this second God is normally the God that appear to the human cognition. When we say God, when human being discuss or even go into war on God, this is they fight, they go into war fighting on God as they perceive, not God in his or herself. So Sufism for me is maybe this is the last trajectory in my life, because even though I grew up in a Sufi tradition, a traditional family is very familiar with Sufism, but I started seriously venturing into Sufism later on in my life. I started Sufism by teaching and lecturing on Ihya by Ghazali like 3 years ago. I decided to venture or to lecture on Sufism because I believe that in Sufism might be one of the best way to avoid literalism and scripturalism, that's the problem that we are facing today among the Muslim society. Scripturalism that result in certain kind of understanding Islam that is, tending to be more fundamentalist, conservative, or rigid, a rigid understanding of Islam or religion. Yeah. So Sufism gives us more deeper understanding of the essence of religion. And it turns out to me that this is my personal experience with the Sufi around me. It seems that people with Sufi understanding of Islam have a tendency of, more wiser in dealing with, let's say, problematic Islamic texts. Okay, just a good example. According to the orthodox theology that we as Muslims believe in, is that, the Ahmadi people, the Ahmadi people, the people who believe in the prophecy after Muhammad, Ahmadiyya movement that started in India, because we have a problem of Ahmadi here in Indonesia. A lot of harassment and attack on Ahmadi took place many times after Indonesia, democratized, unfortunately. Yeah. People with Sufi understanding tend to be having more wiser approach to such kind of problem, you know. And I can show you one good example. This has to do with my teacher, my guru, my master. Yeah, he lived in a village in a country in Central Java. You know, one day, a numbers of kiai, of cleric came to his house visiting and asking him about what should we as a Muslim should do about Ahmadiyya people. You know, the Pakistani example started to attract some people here, because, you know, in Pakistan, Ahmadiyya is considered as non-Muslim group. And many people, you know, started to be attracted to this Pakistani model, you know, excluding or excommunicating Ahmadiyya. So this cleric, numbers of kiai, visited my teacher, my master, asking him about what we as a Muslim should do about Ahmadiyya. Of course, as an Ash'ari scholar, he believed in the finality of the Muhammad prophecy, and he would not consider Ahmadiyya as a legitimate Islamic group, of course, because it's antagonized or it's contradict the Ash'ari theology. But what he said? He said that, okay, I don't agree with Ahmadiyya, but I don't have any business with you all, because you asked me about Ahmadiyya in order to drag me into producing statement that trigger tension with Ahmadiyya. Because at the time, that was in 2005, yeah, that was the peak moment when there was a lot of attack on Ahmadiyya. So those kiai who visited my teacher, those cleric who visited my teacher, they wanted to, you know, to get my kiai into this tension, this conflict with Ahmadiyya. He wanted him to produce statement that legitimize the excommunication and, you know, labeling Ahmadiyya as a non-Muslim group. And he denied, he refuted. Even though he, as an Ash'ari scholar, he believed that Ahmadi upheld a theological viewpoint that contradict Ash'ari theology. So that's, for me, is very interesting. A Sufi understanding is more deeper and more, you know, wiser in dealing with such kind of situation issues. Yeah. So that's my last journey as a Muslim scholar and activist. Yeah. Teaching Ghazali and teaching Ibn Arabi as well. Thank you, Amina. I'm sorry for being a bit longer than expected from me. Thank you, and thanks for including me in this conversation.
Alhamdulillah, there's lots of food for thought. I think maybe you will want to stop sharing the screen, so eventually when the recording comes, it will no longer be on that page. I am keeping my eye on the time so that other people from the gallery can respond. I will keep my statements a little bit shorter. I especially wanted to highlight a person such as yourself in this series, because you're the epitome of why I feel that Indonesia is the best country in the world. And it's not its food, so don't worry about that. I love Indonesia, but I love Malaysian food more. When I came to this region, 1989, I had lived in North Africa, in Egypt and in Libya, two Arabic-speaking countries. And you know, when you adopt Islam by choice, and then you make that your life trajectory, which alhamdulillah, you know, that's been the case for me. You're trying to go to the place that will epitomize Islam for you in such a way as you can maintain this love that you have when you first enter the door. And I didn't necessarily have that experience in Libya, in Egypt, although I had, many wonderful learning experiences, because there was something about Muslim exceptionalism that even caused those members of the continent of Africa not to have an identity except for the love of Arab food had to be halal kind of mentality, I like some Arabic food, I like some Indonesian food, but I also I really couldn't resonate with it because culturally, I'm an African American, and we are very fond of the relationship between our ethnicity and our identity. And when I came to Southeast Asia, it was really the first time that people were clear that their identity as Muslim was not hinged upon Araboism. And it wasn't against it, it simply was a love for their own food. I mean, they love their food, they love their batik, they love, and everything about this embrace of, an authentic identity that is not Arabic, freed me from the prison that made me think that, like the best Muslims must be Arabic speaking, must, something. And so I want to aspire to this, in my own life trajectory. It freed me. And also because of, the good side of the democracy in Indonesia, which is still unique in the world, is a Muslim majority country that is dedicated to the notion of Pancasila. There's some issues in terms of, well, what about people who don't have any religion? But this very idea that it's enshrined in the Constitution, that people don't all believe the same way, you can't get that in North Africa. You can't, so there were certain things about coming to this part of the world that really allowed me to feel completely embodied in my Islam and not have to be anything other than my own self. And I'm not Asian, So this was the experience between both Malaysia and Indonesia. However, even while I was in Malaysia, people kept pointing to Indonesia in terms of its progressive thinking. And I thought, was it just across the water? I mean, why is it such a big deal? Well, actually, one of the reasons is because from very young, there is a commitment to comprehensive understanding of Islamic intellectual traditions. Now, obviously, everybody who graduates from the Pesantren does not become Mas Ulil. However, it is that origin that led for you a path even into Said Qutb, because Said Qutb, I love Said Qutb, I especially love Milestones. I love his tafsir as well. And the whole idea that we have our Salafi stage, that we take things very black and white, and we are also into Muslim exceptionalism, that, the best Islam, the best thing in the world must be to be Muslim, and so everybody who is not Muslim is outside of that best. And then eventually that shell has to crack. And I think for me, one of the ways in which it had to crack was because of the theology, because of the notion of Allah. Our next friend along the way is Dr. Sadia Sheikh from South Africa, and Ibn Arabi is her passion. And, hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about it in about 2 weeks' time. So eventually I realized that the struggle for my identity as a Muslim was nurtured by the way identity is adjudicated in the context of Malaysia and Indonesia. But I still had an issue that of my three loves, sort of intellectualism, abstract reasoning, theology, hermeneutics, philosophy, tasawwuf, right? And spirituality, you know, the practice, you know, the actual embodied devotion of your relationship with your Lord as a way to guide you through each and every day and each and everything that you do, and the necessity of activism. And when I am in circles, I often have to choose between these three. And for the longest time, I would always say activism has to trump the other two, because I know a lot of quietist Muslim Sufi types, they're not engaged. And I know a lot of Muslim intellectuals who are, you know, just doing armchair pontification. They have a lot of words, but they don't ever realize that Islam is a living religion, and therefore the core, even of how we would engage in hermeneutics or our intellectual rationalization, that core must stem from those lived realities. And our current lived reality is the only reality that Allah gives us as a portal, as a doorway into our surrender. And so when I come to Indonesia, there are people like Nur Rafia and, you know, Ibu Liz and Inez. There's no contradiction between the necessity for a dynamic combination between these three. And that is one of the reasons that I really wanted to showcase you, Mas Ulil, because you, even in the way you just shared with us your life course, you were always thinking and growing. I don't mind if somebody comes in and they have their Salafi Wahhabi days, provided they don't stay in it forever. Because when you have that experience of immersion, it gives you the opportunity to examine a way of thinking that allows a certain kind of pride in yourself as a Muslim. But then you realize, okay, well, I'm only one of Allah's creation, and Allah has created people who have not chosen the path of Islam, and yet they must be treated with dignity and respect, because لَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam, that the karama and the dignity is given to all the sons and daughters of Adam and not given just to Muslims. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to showcase you. Your life trajectory is a perfect example of the struggle that we all must go through in order to keep Islam alive for ourselves. And you and I, we don't know what the future will hold. There will be maybe something after Tasawwuf, you don't know. So I want to see if I can close with this quotation from Imam al-Ghazali, and then ask your feedback on those points, and specifically on this quotation. Love for God is the ultimate aim among the stations, and the highest summit among the degrees. For there is no station beyond the perception, idrak, of love, except that it is a fruit from among its fruits, and a consequence of its effects, such as longing, shauq, intimacy, uns, contentment, rida, and their sisters. And there is no station before love, except that it is a prelude to it, such as repentance, tawbah, forbearance, sabra, and asceticism, zuhud, and the like. This is from Imam al-Ghazali, and I would love any comments or feedback that you have, and anyone from the gallery who would like to share a comment or a question. I'll check the chat while Mas Ulil makes a response, and then we'll go from there.
Can you hear me? Test, hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. About Ghazali, this is very interesting. Yeah, I studied two types of Sufism. Yeah, and both are very important in my mind. Yeah, one is Sufi Amali, or Amali Sufi, the practical Sufi, or Suluki Sufism, a Sufism that is oriented toward practical purposes to condition your bodies and your, your conducting of life. Yeah, this is the Suluki Sufism, and this is epitomized by Ghazali, especially through his magnum opus, Ihya Ulumuddin. Yeah, I love this work very much. Yeah, because it gives us a practical, step-by-step guide toward a pious life that is immersed in God consciousness. Yeah. But I love also Ibn Arabi. That is epitomizing the philosophical Sufism, or Sufi, Sufi, a falsafi Sufism, a philosophical Sufism, yeah, a tasawwuf al-falsafi. I love it as well because it gives us more comprehensive insight into how we understand our being, our wujud as a contingent being. Because the idea of wujud is one of the most important idea in the corpus of Ibn Arabi, and also the idea of love. Yeah, and I think combining two type of Sufism is the best way to live as a Sufi, and also as, as a Sufi, as a practical guide, and Sufi also as an ontological, orientation in our and in understanding our being as an insan, as a human being. Yeah. So that's my comment.
There were no questions in the chat, just a few comments, thank you. Anyone who wants me to recognize them, I think on your screen under participant, there's an opportunity for you to raise your hand to let me know that you would like to join in. Don't be shy. No. All right, so I'm going to jump in again because I had intended to say something today for making a second announcement on my Patreon page. I went into my photo files and I found a photo of Mas Ulil that was taken on the day that we went into the cave. And that experience for me, and I hope you will provide the details, because I know you will remember the name of it, and also the Sufi sheikh who is buried nearby. I don't remember any of these. I just remember the experience of the cave, because we climbed through, I think it, we were in that ground for maybe an hour, 15 minutes or something like that, going through slippery rocks, drinking water that spews from the earth fresh, that was still, untouched by anybody. So it was actually palpable, you could drink it. Making dua, making fatiha, making the adhan. There was a group there that was actually praying together in a space that's big enough to house, a small jama. One of the other joys about being in Indonesia for me, other than the fact that I don't like the cold and I never have to worry about that here, but one of the other joys is the nature itself, the vitality of the tropics, the way things grow, and the beautiful color transformations that happens in the rice paddies and it's a bunch of islands, which means the ocean. And again, the ocean is warm. I don't know if people know this, but the ocean off of Australia and the ocean off of California, these oceans are too cold to enjoy. So it's beautiful, but you don't enjoy it, right? Unless you surf or something.
The Indian Ocean.
Yeah, so it is interesting to have this experience in the cave. And at one point, I asked the main party to move on because I wanted to sit in the absolute black darkness. Because we are so used to light that even at night, we don't ever allow ourselves the opportunity to have no light unless we're going to sleep. And I just wanted to sit and to reflect in the absolute blackness. So I asked them to let people go on. Fortunately, the young guides that were with us, they stayed with me. But, you know, I would have just put on my phone flashlight and kept on walking after that. But, you know, it was just to be enveloped by the darkness. You know, it was very transformative. And then we went floating down the river. And again, the water is fresh. And, you know, so these are the experiences that I had in the past year, things that I missed tremendously because of the current lockdown situation. And they have the added pleasure of, you know, the company of you and Ibu Inez and Ibu Liz. But I just was thinking about that when I posted that picture today, because I found it, you know, incredibly moving.
Can you share the picture with us?
No. The reason is because I'd have to log into my account. I don't keep pictures on my computer anymore. I just had a clean of my thing. So I don't keep pictures on my computer. So I'd have to go into the Patreon page and then find that particular post and everything. So it's not as easy. I will share with you, I will send a copy to WhatsApp with you because I can do that more easily. But what was the name of the sheikh that the Sufi master?
Abdul Muhyi.
Abdul Muhyi.
Abdul Muhyi. Yeah, Cipatuja.
Yes, that's a spiritual destination, yeah, for people in that area, in Java, in West Java particularly, yeah, where
Sundanese.
Sundanese, yeah, in West Java, where people make, let's say, a lesser Hajj, yeah.
Yeah.
This is like a Hajj, but this is a local Hajj, yeah, because Indonesia is interestingly rich, as is the case with other Muslim countries as well, yeah. It's rich in a tradition of visiting tomb, veneration of the saint. And this saint, Sheikh Abdul Muhyi, is very popular, you know, saint in West Java. He started, he was the first person who propagated Islam in that area. Yeah. And Sheikh Abdul Muhyi is also an important figure in spreading or in teaching the Sataria order. Sataria order is one of the important order in Indonesia that has lineage back into a sheikh living in Medina by the name of Ibrahim al-Qurani, who lived in 17th century in Medina. Many Muslims who did a bay'ah, an oath of allegiance, or to this tariqah, this order, they get this sanad, this the ijazah from Ibrahim al-Qurani, and then through another sheikh in Aceh, and then Sheikh Abdul Muhyi is one of the earliest sheikh in Indonesia, you know, belonging to this Sufi order. When I was still, not was, yeah, because I'm still with the liberal Islam. I never quit liberal Islam, but I try to expand my horizon by embracing a Sufi approach to my understanding of Islam. But I remain a liberal Islam in the sense that I apply a rational approach to rational and traditional at the same time. Because for me, traditionalism and rationalism doesn't conflict at all. So for me, Ash'ari tradition, Madhabic tradition, I mean, in the sense of four legal madhab as we have here, and rational approach to the Islamic teaching doesn't contradict each other. Because this is interesting. When I studied Islam in Boston University, Amina, yeah, because this is also my important intellectual trajectory as well. When I studied Islam in Boston University, I mean, for quite some time, I had, you know, a notion of rationalism as being a tradition that contradict revelation, as if revelation and rationalism are mutually exclusive. That's why, because I took a course on rationalism and revelation. This is a course taught by a professor in Boston University. I still remember. So the notion that I get from that course was that rationalism and revelation contradict each other. But if you study Islamic tradition, it's different, because rationalism and revelation were interwoven in the tradition so closely that being traditionalist doesn't mean that you are anti-rational. Because, and this is in, when some people would think that visiting a tomb of a saint, that, like that one that we visited in Tasikmalaya in West Java, in Pamijahan in Tasikmalaya, visiting a tomb by a rational person like Amina Wadud or Ulil Abshar Abdalla would seem like contradict on oxymoronic performance. But for me, it's not at all. Because, you know, this, I mean, of course, for the people holding Wahhabist theological point of view, this kind of act would be considered, you know, un-Islamic or, you know, even heretical, yeah. But for me, this, the visiting tomb is symbolic of our commitment to a community. You can imagine the thousands of people make a pilgrimage to a local tomb. I mean, you have many, let's say, Kaaba in Indonesia. It's not just one Kaaba. I mean, this is not a literal Kaaba, but a symbolic Kaaba. At least there are 9 major Kaaba in the sense of tomb, people visiting, plus other minor tomb. Yeah. For rational people, this kind of this kind of tradition or ritual seem to be, you know, anti-rational, doesn't make sense, and so forth. But believe me, and this is something I realized later on, this ritual of visiting tomb is like one of the cultural mechanism by which our society fight back the march of the, let's say, quote unquote, Islamic rigidism or fundamentalism and so forth. I mean, you know, because some people get attracted to the Wahhabist theology lately. and they dislike this ritual as being non-Islamic. Yeah. But this visiting, this ritual of visiting tomb is very important to as a mechanism, as a cultural mechanism by which people avoid being entrapped in rigid understanding of Islam. Yeah. That's my understanding of this ritual. Yeah.
We have a question from Musawa. Please. Is it Zaina?
Yeah. Hi, Assalamualaikum. It's always wonderful to hear Ulil speak. Ulil, I want to ask you, like, what happened to Jaringan Islam Liberal? Does it still exist? Do you guys still have activities, or it doesn't function as a group anymore? Because you don't hear about it anymore. Yeah.
Yes and no. No, in the sense that it doesn't function as an active organization organizing seminar, discussion, and advocacy. I mean, it's no longer active. Yeah. But yes, in the sense that people or friends who founded this organization started another movement in various form. Yeah. So they started another, entities. Advocating for the same ideas as well. So I started, for example, when I lectured on Sufism on Ghazali work, this is like it's like an avenue I used to introduce my, let's say, liberal ideas, but in a different way, because I mean Sufism. I mean, when I try to combine Sufism and rational or liberal interpretation of Islam, it's not easy. I mean, all the time. When you encounter some text in Ihya, in Ghazali's work dealing with women, for example, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I mean, you should, maneuver hermeneutically to reinterpret it in such a way that doesn't, contradict my gender justice, point of view. Yeah, it's not easy, but I try. Yeah. And this gives my, let's say, progressive and liberal ideas more legitimacy, because I use the traditional text or the Sufi text. Yeah.
One of the points that I am going to try to discuss more in the future is how do we embrace ambiguity, specifically ambiguity with regard to text and textual analysis, because the tendency to believe that there is always a right, wrong, black, white, halal, haram kind of answer to everything means that we don't know how to engage that ambiguity. And one of the ways that I think it is affirmed for me in my life, as a scholar and as an activist and a believer, is through Sufism. It's through Tasawwuf. It allows me not to perceive of rationalism as a result of a level of thinking that will come with qat'i conclusions, like with my little mind, I can understand everything. And when I finish understanding it, then I am right. Because وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ, that you will not encompass any of Allah's knowledge except as Allah wills. And the word yuhitu is as the cove, the beach that comes around the water. And if you think about the ocean, being a living body of water that is always in movement. And you think about ahata bihi, you know, the wave just comes in and it goes out. That is the tajalli. That's the theophanic wave of Allah. And we have the capacity to be able to catch that wave, to have thoughts, to have ideas, to have reasoning, but we are not the masters. Allah is the master. And so there is a necessity of humility with regard to knowing and reason, because when the scholars of old used to finish, you know, 30 years of study and 30 volumes of treatises with regard to tafsir or fiqh or whatever, they always wrote, Wallahu a'lam. And to me, this statement of Allahu a'lam, after you've done all that research and written all those words, is as if to say, I have put everything that I have into this treatise, and yet I will surrender to Allah, because only if Allah brings me new knowledge, more knowledge, will I continue to grow and learn. But if I fold this, if I close this book and basically say, well, that's it, the end, then I'm my own Lord and I will not get access to ilmihi, you know, وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ ilmihi. I will not get access to Allah's vast knowledge if I close off the book at the end of it because I worked so hard to make it done. So I'm trying to incorporate a much more necessary component of ambiguity as a condition even of the rational mind and rational thinking. So, you know, I think Nushabika, do you want to make a comment to Masulil?
Nurshabani.
Nushabani, please.
Nur.
Dada, I'm at Saskia, yeah, listening to it's very interesting intellectual journeys of Ulil and Amina. Yeah, as I read here in the chat, that when I came to Jakarta and stay with my sister-in-law, she was introduced me to Iya Ulumuddin. She gave me that book, and I read, just reading, and I become believing that Allah is love. And then I really believe that, and I told my children, of course, and also my friends, that Allah is love. So if you believe in Allah, you have to love everybody, regardless of gender, race, and various category of humankind. Yeah, when I met Saskia, because we come from different culture, different, and I didn't know her very much. I asked her whether she believed in Allah. And she said, no, I'm secular, I'm pagan. And Allah could not stop war and violence and corruption. And I was shocked. And I just said, no, Allah is love. And if there is war or violence, it's not because of Allah could not stop. That is the human being business. And because they don't believe in Allah, that Allah is love. And then maybe she's thinking, and then she's reading Al-Quran, and then she became Muslim. Yes, 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 yes. This is the.
As Nur says, yes.
This.
And
Your mother?
hello,
Ah,
Sas,
yeah,
And then
Saskia.
Saskia. Hello.
and yeah, and of course she's reading many books, but especially she reading almost every day Al Quran until
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Ibu Liz, I love your question. Please, can you share?
Yeah, Mas Ulil, for us, for many feminists, Sufism is like a middle way, kind of the compromising with the patriarchal Islam. So because I also have an experience with the as a feminist with the Sufism, but recently as we discuss about the Sufism study of the Zahra Ayubi, it makes me, like not really frustration, but realize that even Sufism is more patriarchy as well, like theologian or fiqh. What do you think about that, Mas Ulil?
Yeah, this is the conundrum that I'm dealing with as well. Yeah, reading classical texts is not an easy undertaking because, as we know that these classical texts were mostly written by men, and it's pretty much shaped by the patriarchal tradition. Yeah, but I think, and this is something I learned lately. Yeah. If we put too much expectation, yeah, to this textual legacy or textual tradition, and looking it from our 21st century consciousness or sensitivity, of course it makes us frustrated, yeah, because all of this textual tradition are really, a product of the social context in which patriarchy was like the only game in town. So what can you expect? Yeah, Sufi. I mean, like Zahra Ayubi studied in her dissertation. I mean, it's not an exception. Yeah. Legal tradition or legal literature, or even literary theory literature like balagha. Yeah. I mean, it looks neutral, but if you study deeply into and delve into this textual tradition, of course, I mean, the patriarchy is there. But if we view this textual tradition from this kind of point of view, yeah, I mean, we do not learn anything from this tradition. So I think we need to be less demanding of our tradition. Yeah, there is still something to learn. A lot, not just something. A lot of things we can learn from our tradition. Yeah, but yes, there are some problems. I mean, there are some problems. At least we realize, we understand that there is a problem. That's important, because when the problem is that, and this is the problem that I never realized when I was student in the madrasah. Yeah? When we normalize, when we see this textual tradition and anything said therein as something normal, that's problem. But if we see that this textual tradition is a tradition that belongs to certain social context with its problematic, yeah, that's for me is okay.
Yeah, I think patriarchy was pervasive, and therefore it was unquestioned. It's the same kind of thing that we say in the Black Lives Matter movement about white supremacy. It's so pervasive that every white person holds a certain responsibility because it must be dismantled. So the thing about patriarchy is we are part of the first generation of Muslims that have made the comprehensive movement to separate patriarchy from Islam and to take it instead, as you say, a cultural movement. And it's a cultural movement and a cultural milieu and a paradigm that had an impact on everything that was produced and on the ways in which people live their lives. But we are producing new knowledge, and that knowledge is on the basis of the principle of Musawa. So we will be a generation that has shown that there is a way to stay connected to our intellectual traditions without having to also hold on to patriarchy. It's quite okay. It's not a question of we throw out the baby with the bath. I have a lot of misgivings about Al-Ghazali because of his position on gender. And yet, when you find this quotation was in an article I was reading about images of love in Islamic literature or something like that. And I just said, oh, that's such a beautiful quotation from Al-Ghazali. I think I will read it, in our meeting, because there is lots of beauty in it. And because I can see the beauty, it means that I can categorically reject things that are reflections of that patriarchal culture. And I can just say, no. We are way over our time. And it only makes a difference because later on when people are listening, I hope that they will get to all of the pearls of wisdom that you have provided for us and your loving light. Thank you very much for all those who participated from the gallery and who hung in there with us to the very end. Thank you, Mas Ulil. I hope to have you again and to see you soon in another cave.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Mas Ulil.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ulil. Thank you, Amina. Wonderful to see all my Indonesian friends.
Thank you, Zainab.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, sometime.
Good night, Noor.
Thank
Good
you.
night, Noor Shabani. I haven't seen you in a minute.
Yes, Nur
Thank
Sabani
you.
and Saskia.
It's nice to join this discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, Sas.
Salam
Sudah sehat,
alaikum.
Sas? Sas sudah sehat? Belum?
Yeah.
Ya.